What's up, dude?
How's it going? Pretty good.
Wonderful, man.
Awesome.
So tonight we are in March. March is Brain Injury Awareness Month. So I thought it would be a good subject for us to kind of cover. We'll discuss kind of concussions and brain injuries, and we'll start, I think, with just the basics on what's considered a concussion or a brain injury, maybe what signs to look for, what you're supposed to do, and then we'll kind of jump into maybe the injuries you and I have experience with, and then some things we've done to mitigate those. So if you do find yourself with a brain injury, what are some things you can do? I think it's really hard. And mountain bikers, I don't know if it's the chicken comes before the egg or not, but once you have a brain injury, you do more at-risk activities, and then by doing at-risk activities, you end up getting multiple brain injuries that way, which I think has been the story of my life. I mean, ever since I was 5 years old, I've been to the ER at least once a year, for something. I've always just go full on to anything I find.
Yeah. Funny story. My first concussion, it was actually in a BMX race, my first ever BMX race out at St. Peter's when I was in kindergarten. Basically went down the start, was sprinting, hit the first little roller, turned my handlebar sideways, just face planted. Don't really remember too much. Don't know why. But yeah, it just happens out of nowhere, and then kind of screwed.
I mean, when I first started mountain biking, I didn't think I rode hard if I didn't crash, and now that, bikes weren't quite as slacked out. Now, if you were to play that game now, I think it'd be a lot more dangerous, or, I was definitely going slower at the time. But, so that was always a part of it. So I think a lot of us have all had crashes where we kind of get shook up, and sometimes that gets blown off. And I think that's what's important. I had a couple of people reach out to me this week, not bike head injuries, but where they injured their head and, they were like, oh, what am I supposed to do for it? It's like, you're supposed to go see a doctor. And a head injury doesn't mean you don't have to lose consciousness. I mean, you definitely, if you lose consciousness, you have a traumatic brain injury. It can be, we're not doctors here, obviously. This is not medical advice, but the thing is, go get medical advice. That's the whole point. If you fall and you see stars, that's definitely a concussion. At that point, go see a doctor. You can't, if you feel dizzy after falling and hitting your head, and it takes a half hour before you feel normal again, you have to go see a doctor. It's head injuries are not something to mess with, and you can't. I mean, I'm dealing with a brain injury right now. It affects everything I do. Most people wouldn't know it looking at me. You're not going to know right away what's happening, and people around you aren't. And I think when you hit your head, this is kind of important for your buddies. When your buddies fall and hit their head, and if they seem a little bit off for those first couple of minutes or whatever, you have to end the ride. First off, you have to get back to the vehicle safely, and then you have to drive that person to a doctor, even if they're like, no, I don't want to, blah, blah, blah. Once you've hit your head, you're not making sound decisions. I don't care what that person says.
I've seen people hit their heads pretty hard, definitely get a concussion, be like, no, I'm fine. My bones are still good. Don't have anything sticking out of my skin. I'm good. But no, you definitely rang your bell. You definitely need to sit out the rest of the day. Go get some supervision by a doctor, get some scans done. Just make sure with head injuries, sometimes it can be nothing. Sometimes it can be something really simple that turns into something really serious, and you just need to make sure that you're under that supervision to make sure that everything is taken care of.
Yeah. So if you see stars, if you lose consciousness at all, if you are off balance for a few minutes afterwards, if your buddy said that you weren't speaking clearly, that means you hit your brain against the inside of your skull. The inside of your skull is not smooth like the outside. It has a big ridge down the middle. It's just like porous. It's like sandpaper, practically might as well be sandpaper. So if you hit your head hard enough to make your speech slur for 5 minutes, or for you to walk off balance, it messed up your balance, it shook your brain that much, that means your brain scraped against the inside of that rough surface of your skull, and damage could have been done. And whether it's a big crash or a little, you know, I mean, people fall
Mm-hmm.
just from standing around and
Yep.
hit their heads, and it's, you know, you can get fractures and brain bleeds, and I mean, it's a scary situation. So even the minor ones, you
Mm-hmm.
still need to at least see a doctor and let him tell you and make sure, because like I was told not to take ibuprofen
Mm-hmm.
after my head
That's
injury.
super important because it can promote a lot of extra brain bleeding. It can actually kill you if you take it.
Yeah,
So
so a
super
doctor's going
important.
to prescribe something like naproxen or like
Mm-hmm.
Tylenol, I think is what would be
Mm-hmm.
is naproxen. But yeah, I mean, but a doctor needs to make that call.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know,
Like if you hit your head, you have a headache, you're feeling a little dizzy, maybe a little beat up. It's natural for when your first instinct is to take Advil. That's the absolute worst thing that you can do.
yep,
It's just going to promote any. It's going to thin your blood, going to promote any bleeding in your brain that's already there.
yep. So yeah, and that's key too. If you have a headache after hitting your head, you need to go see the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
There,
and
yeah.
you know, I you need to go see a doctor. And here's the deal: if you do have a severe, at least here in, I know, and I want to say it's in most states, but if you get sent to the hospital with a head injury, whether you
Mm-hmm.
have insurance or not, the state will automatically pick you up on insurance.
Nice.
I mean,
That's great.
because so if you're worried that, oh, I hit my head and then they're going to say something's wrong with me and I don't have health insurance, it's going to cost me all this money, go to the damn hospital. The nurses will sign you up for state insurance. So don't let that be a decision not to do it. Now, if you don't have an injury, it's just a concussion, you're probably going to have a $200 bill. But it's better than being dead, you
It's
know.
always good to get checked out by someone who can check your pupils, make sure that everything's functioning, and really just being under observation by professional observation after a concussion is going to be super important because if you do have some complications, like if you do end up having a little stroke afterwards, if you're in a hospital around doctors, they're going to be able to keep that from getting worse and really just rehab you immediately. So it can really stop a lot of these little complications from getting a lot worse if you're just in proper care and surrounded by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I wear when I ride now, because I have had multiple brain injuries, I wear a medical bracelet. It's got my doctor's number
Mhm.
on it, um, and other information, but it says I have a brain injury. So that way, you know, if something does happen to me,
Mhm.
when paramedics arrive on the scene, they
Mhm.
know that I, you know, have a history of that. So if I am having like a mini seizure or something along those lines, they kind of know what's going on and
Mhm.
can give me appropriate care.
Mhm.
You know, but I think just to kind of circle around and end the like harping on everybody, but I think it is important because we hear that all the time in the shop, like, oh yeah, I fell, you know, I broke my helmet,
Mhm.
whatever happened. And then we rode the rest of the day. It was like, absolutely not. Because the worst thing you can do,
Mhm.
if you just have like a concussion, maybe it wasn't that bad, it's just a minor concussion, which is really no such thing as a minor concussion.
Mhm.
But you had a concussion, you go and ride, you fall again because you're a little bit off balance and you hit your head again and concuss your brain again immediately. Now you just quadrupled the damage you did to your brain. So anyhow, moral of the story here: if you crash, you need to go see a doctor. If you have a headache from hitting your head, if you saw stars for a second, if you had lost consciousness,
If you're questioning it at all
see a
whatsoever, if
doctor.
you're like, I hit my head a little, but I think I'm fine, it's always a good idea, always a safe bet to go get it checked out. If you crash at the trail and you're by yourself, most important thing to do is let one of your loved ones, your father, your parents, your spouse, your girlfriend, whatever riding buddy, just let them know, hey, I just hit my head. I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah,
Like
and
either
I
come
mean,
get them,
and that's
just assist. It's just really nice to have open communication with everyone so that everyone knows what's going on.
yeah, it stands to the point of, like I said, I have my medical ID bracelet,
Hmm.
and I didn't get that specifically for mountain biking.
Hmm.
I'll wear it on, you know, especially early on, you know, the first kind of 8 months after my head injury in 2020, I would have to wear it at certain times just because I would slur really bad
Hmm.
if I got tired. So and now, like, I probably haven't worn it in a few weeks, you
Hmm.
know, and if I have a really bad day or I'm a little bit worried that like you know, I'm kind of sound like I'm drunk or
Hmm.
whatever, then I'll put that on. But yeah, so I think we can move on past that. You know, that's the big thing is urge your friends, make sure they're getting care. If they don't want to do it, tell your friends, oh, what happens to me, I talked about the bracelet. It's a good idea when we learned it. You know, when I went through the mountain bike coaching certification, one of the things is having that emergency card in there. So, you know, in your camel backpack or, you know, in your pocket or whatever, it's a good idea to have a list of phone numbers or something. So something does happen to you, whoever does, whether it's another trail user that comes across, they're obviously going to call 911, but then they can also, maybe you can let them know that's there. If nothing else, the paramedics will check your pockets for like a phone or a card like that. So it can just be a piece of paper. They sell them on Amazon. You can find medical ID cards. It says your allergies, your doctor's phone number, your in case of emergency person. Good idea to have for anybody, because when you are out there mountain biking, especially if you're going to be alone, you know, things can happen.
Stuff can happen super quick, just completely out of your control, no matter how safe you are. So it's always good to be prepared. Just be super safe.
The difference, basically, there is no. I was being a little bit. There's no difference between a concussion and a brain injury. If you get a concussion, it's a minor brain injury, but that's a brain injury. You damaged your brain. If you have a bunch of, that's why, you know, you have like football players with CTE. It's because it's a bunch of little concussions that kind of all add together. Kind of something to keep in mind, and something I think young men should know. Like 8 out of 10 TBIs that result in hospitalization, like moderate to severe TBIs, involve alcohol. You know, and now whether that's, a lot of these are kind of, you know, motor vehicle accidents or falls, but and 40% of TBIs are falls. And the most susceptible people for TBIs are men between the ages of like 16 and like 32. Because that
makes
you're
sense.
just doing the most high risk behavior.
You're pretty reckless at that age. It's just kind of what happens.
But if you simply do not drink and get on a bike, or in my case, a longboard, or play with the fireworks, or if you don't involve alcohol, the chances of you ever having a traumatic brain injury goes down significantly.
Yeah, what we're doing is already dangerous enough. You don't need to add alcohol to the equation.
No,
it just really.
If you're of age and you want to partake in alcohol, it's good to do it after. It's a nice treat that people enjoy doing afterwards. But yeah, not before, because and in both of my severe TBIs, I was drinking in both of them. I wasn't drunk. It's not, you know, but I had 2 beers both times.
That's just enough to change the way that you see things, to change the way that you're acting. It's just those little slip ups that can cause something bad to happen.
Yep, absolutely. So have you hit your head before, Mustache?
I have hit my head quite a few times. I've got a couple of concussions. But yeah, anything as severe as you, luckily. But it's just, when you do get a big head injury, you do kind of have to take a step back from things, kind of, okay, what's working, what's not working, find some new systems that you can put into place to help you out in your daily life. Just kind of figuring out what you can do and what you can't do anymore. So it's always a fun little challenge. Makes life a little more interesting.
Yeah, I am amazed by what's his name, Scotty
Kramer.
Yeah, you know, like that guy, like seeing pictures of his skull collapsed in, and then to watch the kind of riding he still does is so insane to me.
Yeah, the fact that he's able to go out there, he can barely move his limbs, but he's still going out there doing his best, trying his hardest. It's really cool to see what's happening. But that just goes to show, even the best of the best, Scotty Kramer at his prime, he was one of the best well-known BMXers riding currently, and he just had a freak accident while filming for I think it was an ad or an edit or something, but he was filming and had a pretty nasty crash. So
yeah, man. And I think, you know, we're 15 minutes into the stream, so any of the passerbys, I think, have tuned out at this point. We've got about 5 more minutes with the rest of our friends before they tune out on us too. You know, and I think it's important, maybe the rest of the time, you know, we can kind of discuss how we felt a little bit after sometimes where we know we sustained some brain damage. so people can help identify it, because I know with me, like my first TBI was in 2007 in an explosion. And at the time, it was kind of before all the guys started coming back from Iraq with brain injuries from IEDs. So research really wasn't there, and it wasn't something that I identified until, a little bit after that time, probably within a year or so. So what happens, I think, to a lot of people is that, I spent the last 13 years kind of sorting out my way through it, not knowing that's what I was doing. And if somebody would have like looked at me and been like, dude, did you ever hit your head, or like, did something happen? And like, I didn't even put two and two together that an explosion could do it. And I was in a very severe explosion. It vaporized metal that was in my hand and shot a razor blade through my neck, kind of right next to my esophagus here, and then kind of stopped in the rear. So they were obviously, when I went to the hospital, that's what they were freaking out about. I think that happens a lot. Like if you're in a car accident, I don't care whether you got especially if you have an airbag, got your seatbelt on, whatever happens, your car's going from 60 to stopping, your brain's going to slap the inside of your skull. So you probably have a brain injury after something like that.
You don't have to hit your head really hard to still get a concussion. If your body has a big impact, those G forces are still going to be playing.
Yeah.
You don't have to hit your head really hard on the ground. You don't have to dent your helmet to get a concussion.
No.
It's really not.
No, you don't have to have a bump off your head in order for it to count as, or on New Year's, I had my projector fall and hit me square on my forehead. I was just sitting there. Now it just hit me. My head didn't move at all, and it bled. And foreheads bleed like crazy, so it's like bleeding down my face. But I wasn't worried that I got a concussion from that, because my, the masses didn't move around. I took an impact and it swelled up. And
just imagine your brain as a block of Jello inside of like a closed Tupperware container, in your brain. Shake it around a bit. You don't want that to happen to your brain.
Yeah. And then, or in like my case, with it being an explosion, there was absolutely no impact to my brain. Now it blew out my hearing. I mean, everything went white. I didn't lose consciousness during that one, but everything went white for about 15 minutes. And then I remember walking back up to people afterwards being like, just saying, yeah, I'm fine. I have no idea what anybody was saying to me, because I couldn't hear anything. But I was like, I'm good.
Yeah, you have no idea what's going on around you. You're just kind of in your own little world, just kind of what just happened.
Right.
You kind of know something's wrong, but you can't exactly figure out what's wrong.
It's like you're in a dream.
It's a very surreal state to be in. If you've been in that state before, and if you haven't been, hopefully you never know. But it's just a really weird state to be in once you hit your head really hard and you're like, okay, what's coming next? You just kind of start getting a little worse. So you'll function for a little bit, then you'll lose memory. That's in my case. But like if you hit your head hard enough, you'll be fine for about 15 minutes, and then after that, it's just all downhill from there. So that's one of my personal experiences with concussion. So
yeah, and that's why we say once you hit your head, you need to stop riding, because you might feel cool for a minute.
But your judgment's way off.
Yeah. Like I walked back up to everybody saying, yeah, I'm fine. I couldn't see, I couldn't hear. I have no idea where I was or what was happening. But I, for some reason, needed to tell everybody I was fine. And then they seen blood, like a little drip of blood trickling down my neck. And they're like, you're bleeding. And then that's kind of where my memory goes. And then next thing you know, I'm in the hospital with some dude like with scissors in my neck, just cutting it away. But then and they didn't diagnose my TBI at that time. So my TBI is traumatic brain injury. I was in a lot of pain for a few days but I thought it was because they were just like cutting meat and tendons around my neck. I tried going back to work. I was a union foundation carpenter at the time. Loved my job. And I got it. This was like August or something. I went in, my first hole, was way too hot. So I could not tolerate heat, and it made me so sick. And I'm not like a quitter, I'm a mountain biker, so I wouldn't make it to the top of every hill. There's no, the thing I loved about being a foundation carpenter is we'd have guys show up, and by lunchtime they'd never come back, so I dug that job, and the difficulty of it is really what made me enjoy going and doing it every day. And I went back for like 2 days, and I was just like, I can't take this anymore. I can't take the heat. So I left immediately. I ended up getting a job in sales, and I went through a lot of kind of stuff. Now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh, that I was obviously suffering from a brain injury for a year and a half. But about a year after that injury, I went back to college, studied zoology, biology, then opened my extermination company, ran that for 10 years and some lighting. So, I had about a year and a half after that, that TBI that was just brutal. And
then you figured out what was working for you. Oh, I can do this instead of this. Like, yeah.
And that's what kind of happens. And, like I said, I think that's why like mountain bikers all get along so well. Cause I think we all maybe have some brain damage, whether we realize it or not, just from whether it's the older guys, doing crazy stuff when they were kids with no helmets on, or, or the rest of us just doing, maybe 5G or something, fried our brains. But, I think it's funny for me because I didn't, like I said, I spent all this time kind of doing all these different things and not knowing why I like doing. Like mountain biking is a huge part of my recovery from my TBI. Eventually being able to get that heart rate back up, and the endorphins that go, and it kind of makes everything fire. And kind of like it's not really a flight or flight response, but adrenaline does a really good job of, if you have damaged neurotransmitters, if you have like a sudden jolt of adrenaline, it kind of goes around all those connections. So same thing when you're in like a flight, or like if you're mountain biking, you're flying downhill and there's trees everywhere, your adrenaline's pumping. It's why your heart's racing when you're going downhill. It's why it's just as hard as it is pedaling back up it. So what happens when the adrenaline hits your brain, it helps reconnect a bunch of those maybe damaged neurotransmitters or whatever it may be. It kind of shortcuts around them, and then so your brain's firing well. So I was like, oh, that's why, like, I always felt I had a mountain bike and before I opened the shop, I mountain biked every single day. I started rock climbing, so I would at least take one day off for mountain biking, ideally.
Nice.
But because I was addicted to it because it made my brain feel normal. And, I think a lot of people get that. A lot of people get that kind of refresh on their brain, that reset, to help get them through the rest of your week by being on their mountain bike. So that's why I say, like, I feel like we all kind of get along, because I feel like everybody's maybe got a little bit of brain damage, because if you dig mountain biking, if you dig the excitement and the kind of fear of it, and you need that to be a nice, healthy, happy person, then maybe that's why.
Yeah, most people who I know who are into mountain biking don't have normal hobbies. If you have a hobby, it's something that you're completely, just overwhelmingly present in at the time, just trying to basically fight for your life. But going back to what Adam was saying, like, if you have a head injury, even if you don't really know you have a head injury, looking back, I'm sure you like connecting all the dots. Oh, this makes sense. But if at the time you had gotten some care, and maybe someone would have been able to say, hey, this is probably going to happen to you, watch out for this, that's going to happen, you would have been able to change a lot of things. But it still worked out really well. Still, the owner of Mountain Bike Shed cannot beat that. So
yeah, dude, and without a brain injury, there's no way I would have been able to like zone in and focus on it, because I mean, that's how my brain gets. Like, I have to have like consistency. I have to do things a certain way always. Or like you said, you'll write things down, which is an important thing. But yeah, I mean, I didn't realize it, and then it was very obvious to me. I fractured my skull about a year and a half ago now. So I'm probably about 18 months out from that. It was September 2020 or March of 2022. A year and a half ago. It was very obvious to me as I began my recovery that I was like, oh, I feel how I always do, just a little bit worse. And, then we were able to start putting things together, and talking with my neurologist, did that. And then of course he's worried about, like, I had a car accident, of course, and like I crashed my street bike, and like,
you probably a couple more undiagnosed.
Yeah, and then how many crashes on a mountain bike? Like,
or you've just kind of hit the ground, hop back up, and been like, oh.
Yeah, or playing hockey growing up, So I think, and that's why I say that, I think all of us are, I mean, we've definitely all had concussions. So, each time it compounds, and, we could both have the exact same like force hitting the wall, and your injury could be completely different, than mine would be,
Mhm.
So so many things go into it.
There is also a lot of debate on like what how your brain is, like how hydrated you are, whether you have caffeine in your system or whether or not you have creatine in your system, kind of helping hold water in your muscles. So there's a lot of really interesting research that we're not going to get into because we're not the experts. But if you're watching this at home, that is definitely something for you to look into. Um, but
Yeah, and I think an important thing now too, because whether people watch this now or in 5 years, I'm sure
mhm,
there'll be some sort of virus or flu going around. Vitamin D is a big one for people with traumatic brain injuries. Most people with TBIs or brain injuries are going
mhm,
to have depleted vitamin D levels. So, taking a good multivitamin, definitely vitamin D though,
mhm.
and then your other vitamins that
Mhm.
people should be
Yep.
taking.
My neurologist always recommended taking a broad spectrum omega right after a head injury. That can help protect the brain a little bit and help it recover, help reduce a little inflammation. He's a mountain biker actually as well, so he's really really knowledgeable about
Right.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then like I think things like zinc and whatnot are important too. But
Hmm.
yeah, good multivitamin. And I found all this out. So what happened to me, I went longboarding.
Hmm.
The shop used to be next door to a brewery.
Hmm.
So I went with one of my employees at the time, went over to talk with him. He had some stuff going on, so just having a friendly ear for him. I ended up getting stuck for 2 beers instead of just one, so I had two IPAs, and then I was supposed to go for a longboard ride that night. Now I'm a big helmet guy. Like I try to tell everybody a full face helmet. I wear a full face helmet when I'm on trails. For whatever reason, I was too cool for school, and because I'm just riding around on the street and just
Hmm.
taking a nice easy ride on flat pavement.
You're moving 15 feet. It's one of those things that you don't think twice about. You're just like whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
So I don't know what happened. I woke up a day later from what we've gathered, talking to other people. I remember sitting at the brewery, and I remember like getting up and being like, oh, I'm going to go for a ride and leaving. And then like headed towards my shop, but that's where my memory cuts.
mhm,
We found my broken remote the next day in my shop. Then talked to somebody. We had one of our guys come in late that night at like, because I went for a ride around like 7.
mhm.
We had a guy come in at 9. He seen me there. He said I was throwing up in the bathroom. I had blood coming out of my ears and my nose. He thought I was just like really drunk or something.
If you're throwing up and you have blood coming out of your ears, it's a little more than just drunk. He probably should have called the police, but
Yeah, immediately should have called
um,
the ambulance. But so I didn't
but
know what was happening. And then another friend had stopped by and also did not take me to the hospital, but then made me a bed on the floor. So I woke up at 7 a.m. when my next day employee
mhm.
came in, opens up. I wake up. It's like 7 a.m. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, felt super
What just
hungover.
happened? Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And he was like, yeah, man, like, you know, did you drink a little too much last night? I was like, I think I only had like 2 beers. And this was 14 hours later from when I originally took the ride.
Mhm.
And that's my first memory is me waking up to him opening the door. And he went and got me like Pedialyte, all this and that. I sat out in the back in my car and just tried to sleep it off, thinking it was a hangover. I eventually went home, and the next morning I got in the shower, and it was noticed I had a bruise right behind my ear. So a little like, I don't know, quarter size purple bruise behind my ear. And then that is a very obvious sign of a skull fracture.
Mhm.
So I got rushed to the hospital, um, went to the closest hospital we could get to. And I was still like, by that point, still feeling like I was throwing up, like just like super badly hungover,
Mhm.
terrible headache, like just pounding. I was like bent over. I couldn't like stand up straight even because I was
It
just
was
did
all
not
your
feel.
energy to just kind of function, stay
Yeah,
upright, stay
dry
conscious.
heaving. They take me to the hospital, and I got to the hospital, and they freaked out, dude. And I've had all kinds of health issues or like serious
Mhm.
injuries, broken legs, ACLs, appendicitis, Bell's palsy. I don't know what else I've done. Broken arm, a bunch of stitches in different
Mhm.
places. I don't know. I've had a ton of injuries and a ton of things that were serious.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had doctors look at me. I've never seen the amount
Mm-hmm.
of fear on
Mm-hmm.
like nurses and doctors' faces when they see me after
Mm-hmm.
finding out that my injury happened 36 hours before I got to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So they immediately stuck me in the arm, started pumping IVs into me. And they said, we called an ambulance. You need to rush down to Barnes, or Warshu immediately. So they put me in the ambulance, took me down there again. They were just freaking out. I ended up only being in the hospital for 2 days. I was coherent the whole time in there. I kind of passed all the little tests. I had somewhat clear speech. So I didn't get induced into a coma. So that's what happens. A lot of people, when you have a brain injury, I had a skull fractured from kind of behind my left ear all the way around the back, past my other ear, and stopped about here. It's called the basilar fracture. It was my occipital bone. It's kind of like spongy in there, the bones are, especially around the ear canal.
Nice.
So I had a bunch of air that got released into the brain cavity.
That's super fun.
And then the trauma from it hitting, we assume I hit the back of my head. The trauma from hitting, and then your brain bounces back and forth. So you actually damaged the front and the back. But anyhow, and it messed up my hearing kind of the rest of the way over there.
But that's amazing that you were able to even make it to the hospital.
So people die from that. And I guess I managed to pull myself up off the concrete, pull my board back into my shop, and somehow get to the bathroom. And I don't remember any of that happening.
Yeah. You don't know how it happened. It just, if someone had to drag you physically,
if you've lost consciousness, you have at least a mild TBI, and you might have a moderate or even a severe TBI if you lose any amount of consciousness. I think for it to be severe, it's got to be over like 6 hours or something that you lose consciousness. But yeah, they rushed me there. I had a bunch of blood on my brain. So what happens is they monitored me very closely. I suppose they give me some medicine to maybe make that not happen.
Did they give you medicine to keep you from vomiting?
Yeah, it was stable by the time I got there. What happens, people, is if it's not stable and the brain continues to swell, they induce a coma. And sometimes they'll cut a flap out of your skull to allow extra room for your brain to expand, because that inflammation causes damage. Mine was stable. They took MRIs.
There wasn't any crazy pressure building up in there.
It was staying where it was at. And then by 48 hours after that, it was still stable. So they said, you can go home. The only person I spoke with was a neurosurgeon. He was like, oh, you need to go talk to your primary care doctor. And then they had me leave, and I met with him maybe like a time or two after that. But the thing they don't tell you, so if you had a brain injury, and even if you met with a neurosurgeon a couple of times after your hospital visit, they don't really give you a plan of action past that. I was pretty much, was it.
It's when as
soon as my brain was stable and the blood was gone, then he was like, all right, that's it. I was like, okay.
I had a pretty nasty concussion in high school. I went to the doctor. He was like, yeah, come back next week, see how it's doing. Come back next week, see how it's doing. Come back in 2 weeks, let's see how it's doing. Damn, it's still not better. Come back in 2 weeks. And it just kept going and going and going. And he was just like, I really don't know what to do here if you're still having these symptoms. It's just, they really don't know how you're going to respond to these injuries until they actually see you healing and see what you can do. So it's just really kind of terrifying.
So I did look up some stats before we started. In like 2021 or whatever, 280,000 people were hospitalized with a TBI. 1 out of 6 of those people died.
That's a lot.
And it's mostly men. Men are like 2 or 3 times more likely to die from a head injury than women. Why? Because we pretend everything's all right. Women are a little bit, even though the people I heard from this week were both women. And guess what? They both went and seen doctors.
As you should.
Now, actually, I don't know the second person. I know the first person did for sure go see a doctor, and then told me what they got prescribed and stuff. And they said they were fine, but she had a bump on her head. It's like, dude, it's not worth the risk. Just go see a doctor. Let them give you the pain medicine you're supposed to be on, and they know to monitor you. But yeah, they don't give you much past that. And by the time I stopped seeing my neurosurgeon, I was like 2 or 3 months past. And like, I didn't know what to do from there. I got lucky because this is a bike shop, and because I have outdoor customers and everybody kind of knew what was going on, because I wasn't able to work. I couldn't even leave the house for at least a month. I never wore glasses before. These are prism glasses. My vision's fine. It's when you have a brain injury, this is another thing. If you have a severe brain injury, if you lose consciousness, 90% of people or so that have a brain injury have something called like convergence. I don't know. It's basically your eyes each take a picture, and your brain then takes each one of those images and lines them up perfectly. My brain lines them up a little bit outside of where they should be. And it's different for near and far. My far is a little bit worse, whatever. So these are prism glasses. I'll wear them for a couple years, and then ideally I'll be done. I won't have to wear them again. But because my brain was doing that, it's always done that. And I've never been that. As soon as I got these glasses and looked like I was driving up Highway 44 and like here coming to Eureka from St. Louis, just beautiful, like trees on both sides. Some of my favorite views are driving down 44 towards Eureka. And I could just see like the outlines of the trees and some like, I'm like, oh shit, like I haven't been able to see for 15 years. And this is why, because everything just looked foggy at a point. And so that was really cool. And then, but what I realized was happening with my last one is because once I got the glasses, I was running into walls and door jams on the right side. And of course, no doctor told me what to do. I wasn't.
Yeah.
I had no one to help me.
Unfortunately, when you're in that situation, you have to be very proactive to get the best treatment. And if you're pretty head injured, that's going to be very difficult for you to do if you don't have someone close to you fighting for you. So you really have to be.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't run into door jams anymore. I don't trip over stuff on the right side ever since I got these glasses. I don't feel nauseous or dizzy during the middle of the day, which I did for about 8 months after my injury. It took a while before I got it. But no, I did have a customer who owned a wellness clinic. I did hyperbaric oxygen therapy there. I did vitamin IVs once a month to make sure that, I had everything my body needed to heal and all that good stuff. I think the HBOT treatments were really good. They call them dives. Basically, it's a big pressurized tank. You get in it, they put oxygen in your nose. They add pressure like you're going down underwater. Is why they call it diving. So it adds all this atmospheric pressure, and it allows your brain to absorb more oxygen than it would at normal rates or whatever it may be. So
cool.
And that promotes healing. I feel like that did a lot to help me. So if someone is suffering from kind of, if you're a month out from your head injury and you're still having headaches and you're still not feeling good, that's maybe something to look into. Again, it's 2022. But I was in a soft shell unit, which isn't the best. They have like hard shell units. So you have to sit in there for an hour. I paid $60 to do it. So insurance isn't going to cover stuff like that. Most of the treatments I did that I feel helped me kind of come back from my brain injury weren't covered by insurance. So you can look for wellness clinics, stuff like that. You can look up a lot of Joe Namath. Did the hyperbaric oxygen therapy for his, and he says, it reversed a lot of his CTE, and he speaks clearly. I mean, and that's one thing, and there's all kinds of examples like that. And normally I'm wearing my AirPods. I have noise canceling in 90% of the day. Mustache talks to me all day long with my headphones in, and I'm not listening to music. I just have noise canceling in, and I can have conversations with everybody. But because noises are too much, and I'm a year and a half out. Like, that's how serious brain injuries are. My life will never be the same. I still wake up every morning sick. Normally it's just a headache, and then within about 45 minutes after I kind of got some water in me, had a glass of coffee, got my vitamins, normally by that point my headache's starting to go away. But some mornings, like if I overdid it the day before, I'll be dry heaving in the morning for an hour. It's really strange. Or I'll overdo things at work. And then or if I go and ride, even just riding my board where I'm not like getting a lot of cardio, it'll still knock me out the next day. So,
it's not like breaking your leg or something. You'll rehab, you can come back, you'll rebuild all your strength, you'll be fine. It's kind of there with you for a while, which is really why you need to take it seriously. Yep.
And if you keep doing it, it gets worse, which sucks. But there is things you can do. And that's why we started this YouTube channel, really, which is kind of funny. Because one of the issues I was having with my brain injury was my speech. I always can notice, and like I'm tired right now, so I'm sure if people are listening, they've listened to other podcasts, they'll hear my voice is a little like more kind of mushy or slurry than it normally is. But if I get really tired, it sounds like I'm drunk almost when I talk. So that was one thing that was obvious. As I got over kind of past a year, it was happening less. But that used to happen really bad before, even to a point like if I was like just like stress was really high and really emotional, like I would just completely miss and mix up words. Like it would get like just real kind of, there's a word for it, but it's an offensive word that people don't like me using. So I won't use it. But I think everybody, just like the way I talked was not how a person would normally sound. So that stuff was obvious. But what I didn't notice is that because of my brain injury, I'm sure if anybody's listened to this podcast before and you do it too, we kind of like cut and jump around throughout our sentences. So I think it's really hard to follow. And it's just because it's kind of how our brain works. So when people talk to me, it kind of cuts and jumps around too. And what I didn't realize I was doing is filling in blanks, or I thought I said one thing and I used completely different words. So the podcast or doing the YouTube live streams, hey, we just wanted to be on this media and reach everybody in a kind of cool way. I think we work here at the bike shop because we think it's awesome to hang out here and the conversations we get to have. So I was like, why wouldn't we just do a live stream and let everybody else have the conversation with us? But the kind of big point for me is I wanted to be able to go back and watch what I said and watch what I do. And I catch all the time where like, oh no, I know for sure I meant to say this word and I said that word. And that completely changed the meaning to everybody else except for me. So I think I'm having one conversation, they're having a different one. So yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for my brain injury, I never like being on camera. I don't like being on camera. We do this very casual live streamy because if I've tried recording these without like talking to you or somebody I like talking to, and it is, I mean, it's so
just
awkward.
By yourself, just talking, it's just not going to work.
So weird, dude. But anyhow, yeah, I mean, and like, oh, and I didn't know hitting your head, you could lose your sense of smell. Can't smell anything. And it's been a year and a half. The doctor said that it'll never come back. And he said it's super common with traumatic brain injury. So, that's another risk you don't even think about. You're like, what? And food doesn't, I mean, now everybody's had it with COVID. So people kind of can get where I'm coming from, where like food, like you can taste some stuff, it tastes off.
Yeah.
Or like you can smell like two different things, but it's off.
That really just totally impacts your quality of life. Like if you can't eat what you enjoy anymore, if you can't enjoy the simple things, it really is going to start compounding, especially just with the head injury. And something else that I don't think we've talked about at all that should definitely be talked about is if you do have a head injury, you are going to be more likely to have some mental health issues going on. So if you do start to experience any of those, it is super important that you reach out to get some help before they get any worse. It's just like hitting your head. Get help. It's super nice to be able to get that figured out.
Yeah, it's really important. I do find that, if you do get diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury, that seeking out therapy is going to be difficult because I don't think a lot of them understand it. But I mean, that is something important. If you are talking to a professional about your mental health, if you're a mountain biker, you let them know, like, oh, I have, because that's what, like, when I talk to my neurosurgeon, like, that's how I ended up figuring out that I had a severe brain injury previously. But then he was also weirded out about the car accident. I was like, oh, I didn't even consider, like, when I crashed my bike or my car, but to him that was a big deal, and that factors into things.
Like in my medical history, when you pull up my chart at my doctor's office, it shows the first thing in big letters is history of multiple concussions, so that if I ever come in, they're like, hey, this he's had some head injuries before. Definitely want to take a look and make sure that nothing's bad.
Yeah, your brain controls everything, come to find out, dude. That was like, I think if there could be a positive for my brain injury, because it did. I mean, like I said, I wake up sick every morning because of it still to this day. Every sense I have it is altered and different than what it was.
But you had that diagnosis, and now you're able to get on a track and figure out.
Yeah, but and all that happening, and it's better now than it was in the beginning, but like it lets you have a very acute understanding of what your brain really does and the control it has over your body. And it's pretty powerful. I think it's really cool that I got to experience that. I don't think without such a traumatic brain injury or having multiple added on to each other, that I would get to have that experience and kind of that understanding of it. Because you can look up brain injury symptoms and there's a list, and I bet you a lot of our customers check off half of them. And anxiety, depression, if you wake up at like 6 a.m. in the morning freaking out, like with full of anxiety, like early as F in the morning, you probably have had a head injury. That's from your head injury. It's called PTSD. You don't have to, and that's, again, when we go back to like the soldiers that got diagnosed with PTSD as they were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, the PTSD, a lot situational, I'm sure, and the things they had to see and endure. But even with, minus that, PTSD occurred from the actual blast. Even if, let's say they were fortunate enough not to see combat, which probably wasn't a lot of guys back then. But an IED hit their tank and everybody survived, let's say, which again probably wasn't the case a lot of times. But minus the trauma part of it, the damage is what can cause PTSD. So and there's a lot of side effects of brain damage and brain injuries, anger, impulse control, risk-taking behavior, all these things that we do, buying $4,000 bikes and then sending them off the hills. If I think it takes a brain injury to do that.
A little bit.
Or to buy, how many full suspension bikes do we have here? Like 50?
Yeah.
So it takes a brain injury to buy 50 full suspension bikes in the middle of Missouri, dude.
In the middle of winter.
But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just no matter how minor it seems, go and get it checked out and make sure that's the case. And if you do think that, if you suspect that you have a brain injury, start tracking that down. Start, talking to people that were around during that time, see if they noticed a change in your behavior. Look up, the signs of brain injuries, look up the symptoms.
And think of the long-term effects as well. Don't just think of, oh, I just crashed in practice, I have my enduro race later today, all my sponsors are here, it's a big deal. It's a lot bigger than that. It really is. If it's bad, it's going to affect your entire life. So it's really, really important that you just think big picture, how it's going to affect you further down the road.
Now, when you had your kind of, I guess what you would consider your worst TBI, you sustained one previous to that or one directly following that? Did you receive two within like a year or something?
There was basically I got two more or less back to back. The first was much more severe than the second. The second one was caused by basically poor motor control, poor judgment. So it's really easy that when you're in that state where you're not thinking straight, that you can make some choices that are not gonna really think too good in the long run.
And that's one thing with a brain injury, or as you're recovering from a brain injury, they compare it to like having, like, everybody's got like an Energizer battery or whatever, like a AA battery. Most people will start every morning when they wake up with a full battery or close to. If you have a brain injury, you're starting with 50% or 25% or not the full battery. So as you do things, it takes more energy because your brain has to actually think about what it's doing and no longer just automatically does things. So your body's working harder to do the same tasks it used to do before, and you're working with slimmer reserves. And then once reserves are out, like I said, with my speech, how it ends up starting to slur really bad. The same thing is what your body does. So especially as it's recovering, if you're overdoing things, then you start losing motor control functions, and that leads to more, other things happening. Or if you're driving, or riding your bike or whatever it may be. And there was something I was going to say about that. I forget. Something I was going to say about people hitting their heads. I have no short-term memory. Found out what that means. Gosh, what was I gonna say? It was gonna be good too. It was one of those golden nuggets of advice for brain injured people.
Write everything down.
Yeah, dude. Oh, that kills me. I hate that I don't know. Yeah, you said you have multiple brain injuries. Your function slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I was going with that. So I think on that note, it's a good time. It was something about, gosh darn, dude. I should just stopped you like I always do and said what I wanted to say.
You should have just cut me off.
Yeah, vitamins, doctors. You need a neurologist. Neurologists are normally hard to get into. You have to have your doc. That's why you go see a primary care doctor when the emergency room releases you, because then your primary care doctor will then refer you to a neurologist that will take 6 months to get into. So be aware of that, and then he'll send you out to get the actual help you need. But yeah, research, do things, ride your bike.
Just be smart. Don't do stupid stuff. But if you do end up doing stupid stuff, just make sure you're relatively safe about it. Like, we're not going to tell you not to go hit big jumps and drops and stuff. Just be a little mindful. Just be safe with it.
Yeah, I mean, you got Bob Saget. The guy fell in his hotel room, fractured his skull, had a headache, knew he had a headache, was just going to sleep it off, lay down to go to bed, never woke up.
I mean, that could be you riding the trail, just hit your head at Bluffview, go back home, boom. It's
because your brain continues to swell.
And if you're asleep, if you will pass out, if you black out, you physically cannot wake up, no matter how bad the pressure in your brain's telling you to wake up. So serious stuff. It's super, super important to just make sure that you get proper medical care, whatever that is, depending on your situation. Just
always wear a helmet.
Yeah. Helmets are super important, and wearing the right helmet and a proper fitting helmet is super important as well. Like, if you're going to do some crazy stuff at a downhill park, don't wear a half shell, put on a full face. Just be smart with it.
Yeah. And eat your vegetables.
Linda's a star. Linda, are you a star?